Story 1. Ghost Truck of Interstate 80. Marcus Chen was doing 95 when he saw the headlights in his rearview mirror, and he knew he was going to die. The semi-truck had appeared out of nowhere on the empty Nebraska highway, its chrome grille gleaming like teeth in the darkness. No running lights, no company logos, just 18 wheels of pure menace bearing down on his Honda Civic at impossible speed. But here is what made Marcus, his blood freeze as he gripped the steering wheel. There was no one driving the truck. The cab was empty, dark as a tomb, yet the massive vehicle was gaining on him with predatory precision, its engine roaring like something alive and hungry in the midnight air of Interstate 80. This was American horror at its most primal. The open road, the endless Nebraska plains, and something supernatural hunting travelers who had nowhere to run except into the cornfields that stretched beyond the headlight beams like an ocean of shadows. Marcus had been driving cross-country for 3 days, hauling everything he owned from his failed life in California to a new job in Chicago. Standard millennial migration story. College debt, broken relationship, parents who stopped returning his calls. The highway was supposed to be his fresh start, not his grave. Gas stations. Drivers whispering about the ghost truck that appeared on I-80 between mile markers 126 and 132. Always after midnight, always hunting lone travelers who made the mistake of driving through Nebraska, this heart of darkness. Creepypasta bullshit, Marcus had thought. Urban legends designed to spook tourists and sell coffee to truckers with too much time and too little sleep. But the headlights in his mirror were real, and they were getting closer. Marcus floored the accelerator, his four-cylinder engine screaming in protest. The speedometer needle swept past 100, then 110, faster than he'd ever driven in his life. The Honda shook like it was coming apart, but the truck behind him matched his speed effortlessly. Through his rearview mirror, Marcus could see into the cab now. The driver's seat was definitely empty. No one at the wheel. No hands on the chrome steering wheel that gleamed in the dashboard lights like surgical steel. But somehow the truck was following every curve of the road with mechanical precision. Mile marker 127 flashed past in the headlight glare. Then 128. Marcus was in the heart of the hunting ground now, trapped on a straight stretch of highway with nowhere to hide and no way to outrun 18 wheels of supernatural vengeance. The truck, its air horn blasted through the night, 3 long blasts that sounded like the screams of everyone who died on this stretch of Nebraska asphalt. The sound raised goosebumps along Marcus's arms and made his hands shake on the steering wheel. Behind the ghost truck, other headlights were appearing, not following the phantom 18-wheeler, but fleeing from it. A parade of desperate drivers all trying to escape the same impossible predator. Marcus grabbed his phone and tried to call 911, but there was no signal out here in the Nebraska wasteland. Just dead air and the sound of his own panic breathing mixing with the Honda's laboring engine. The truck was close enough now that Marcus could see its details in his mirrors. It was an older model Peterbilt, probably from the 80s, with a sleeper cab and chrome exhaust stacks that rose like silver towers against the star-filled sky. The paint job was pristine black with red flames running along the sides. But the flames weren't painted on. They were moving, flickering and dancing like real fire, casting hellish light across the empty cab where no driver should be sitting. Marcus had seen enough horror movies to know what happened next. The truck would ram him, sending his Honda spinning off into the cornfields where his body would be found days later by highway patrol. Another mysterious accident on Nebraska's most haunted stretch of interstate. But instead of ramming him, the truck pulled alongside. Marcus risked a glance to his left and immediately wished he hadn't. The cab wasn't empty. There was a driver, but the driver had no head. A headless trucker sat behind the wheel, hands positioned at 10 and 2, wearing a flannel shirt and trucker cap that somehow stayed on despite having nothing to hold it up. Where his neck should have been, there was only darkness, not blood or bone or torn flesh, just an absence that hurt to look at directly. The headless driver turned toward Marcus's car, and somehow Marcus could feel invisible eyes watching him from the void where a face should have been. The truck, whose passenger window rolled down, revealing the dark interior of the cab. A voice came from the emptiness, hollow and echoing like sound from the bottom of a well. "Pull over." 2 words that carried the weight of inevitability. Not a request or a demand, but a statement of fact. Marcus was going to pull over. The only question was whether he did it voluntarily or after the truck forced him off the road. Pull over now. Marcus kept driving. 115. 120. The Honda was redlining, but he pushed it harder. Maybe he could outrun the supernatural. Maybe physics still meant something even when dealing with ghost trucks and headless drivers. The truck fell back, disappearing from his peripheral vision. For a moment, Marcus thought he escaped. That speed had somehow broken whatever rules governed the phantom 18-wheeler. Then the truck appeared in front of him, not passing him, not pulling ahead through some burst of impossible acceleration. It was simply there, blocking both lanes of interstate like it had teleported into position. Marcus slammed on the brakes, but momentum and physics conspired against him. The Honda was doing over 100 miles per hour, and there wasn't enough road to stop before hitting the truck, its massive rear doors. He was going to die in a fireball of twisted metal and shattered dreams. But at the last second, the truck vanished, gone like it had never existed, leaving Marcus alone on the empty highway with smoking brakes and a heart that felt like it was trying to explode in his chest. Mile marker 132 flashed past. He was through the haunted zone. Safe, or so he thought. Marcus pulled over at the next rest stop, hands shaking as he tried to process what had just happened. The parking area was empty except for a few semi-truck parked in the commercial vehicle section, their drivers presumably sleeping in their cabs. He needed coffee, needed human contact, needed to convince himself that he hadn't just experienced a supernatural encounter on the Nebraska plains. The rest stop building was one of those generic concrete structures that dotted America's interstate system. Fluorescent lights, vending machines, and the kind of institutional cleanliness that felt sterile and unwelcoming. But it was civilization, and civilization meant safety. The coffee was terrible, but it was hot and caffeinated and real. Marcus sat at a plastic table and tried to come up with rational explanations for what he'd seen. Hallucinations brought on by sleep deprivation. Some kind of elaborate prank involving projection technology. A case of mistaken identity involving a regular truck that happened to look scary in the darkness. None of these explanations felt right, but they were better than accepting the alternative. That he'd been hunted by a ghost truck driven by a headless trucker on America's most haunted highway. You saw it too, didn't you? Marcus looked up to find a woman standing by his table. Mid-40s, wearing jeans and a University of Nebraska sweatshirt. She had the kind of tired eyes that came from driving long distances alone. Saw what? The truck, the one with no driver, or the driver with no head, depending on how you look at it. Marcus felt his carefully constructed rational explanations crumble. You've seen it? 3 times now. Always between mile markers 126 and 132. Always after midnight. Always hunting. She sat down across from him without invitation. I am Dr. Sarah Hendricks. I teach folklore at UNL, and I've been researching the Interstate 80 phenomenon for 2 years. It's real enough that 17 people have died on that stretch of highway in the past decade. All single vehicle accidents, all involving cars that left the road at high speed with no apparent cause. Dr. Hendricks pulled out a tablet and showed Marcus a collection of accident reports and newspaper clippings. Photos of twisted metal and grieving families. Statistics that painted a picture of Interstate 80 as one of America's most dangerous highways. The official explanation is driver fatigue and poor road conditions. But the witnesses tell a different story. What witnesses? Truckers mostly. Professional drivers who know the difference between tired hallucinations and actual encounters with the supernatural. They call it the headless hauler. Been appearing on this stretch of road since 1987. Marcus, his coffee had gone cold, but he barely noticed. What happened in 1987? A trucker named Dale Morrison was found dead in his cab at this very rest stop. Decapitated, clean cut, like someone had used a sword or an axe. His truck was idling, driver, his door open, but there was no sign of his head. Jesus, the head was never found. Neither was the killer. Dale's truck was impounded as evidence, but it disappeared from the police lot 3 days later. Security cameras showed it driving away by itself in the middle of the night. Dr. Hendricks swiped to another screen showing a grainy black and white security photo. A Peterbilt truck pulling out of a fenced lot, its cab clearly empty in the harsh glare of the security lights. That was impossible. So is a headless trucker hunting cars on Interstate 80. But here we are. She closed the tablet and looked at Marcus with eyes that had seen too much. The question is, why did it let you live? Marcus had been wondering the same thing. The ghost truck had him dead to rights. Could have rammed him or forced him off the road or simply scared him into a fatal mistake. Instead, it had vanished at the last second. I think I do. Dr. Hendricks leaned forward, lowering her voice like she was sharing state secrets. The pattern of attacks isn't random. The headless hauler only kills certain people. Travelers who meet specific criteria. What criteria? People who are running away from something. Escaping failed relationships or dead-end jobs or family obligations. People who are using the highway to abandon their old lives and start fresh somewhere else. Marcus felt ice water in his veins. That description fit him perfectly. California to Chicago. Failed relationship. Dead-end job. Parents who stopped caring. He was the textbook definition of someone running away from his problems. But you were still alive, Dr. Hendricks continued, which means either you don't fit the pattern or something else is going on. What else could be going on? Maybe the ghost truck doesn't want to kill you. Maybe it wants to recruit you. Before Marcus could ask what that meant, the rest stopped. His fluorescent lights flickered and went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in a hellish red glow that made shadows dance on the walls like living things. Through the windows, Marcus could see headlights pulling into the parking lot. A black Peterbilt with chrome exhaust stacks and flames that moved like living fire. The headless hauler had found them. We need to go, Dr. Hendricks said, grabbing her tablet and heading for the exit. Now, but when they reached the door, it wouldn't open. The electronic locks had engaged, trapping them inside the rest stop with whatever was driving the ghost truck. Through the glass, Marcus could see the Peterbilt, this door opening. No one stepped out, but somehow he knew the headless driver was walking toward the building. Invisible footsteps on asphalt, the sound of work boots that belonged to a dead man. There's another exit, Dr. Hendricks whispered, pointing toward a maintenance door marked, employees only. They ran through the darkened building, past vending machines that hummed like mechanical insects and restroom doors that stood open like waiting mouths. Behind them, glass shattered as something that shouldn't exist forced its way into the land of the living. The maintenance door was locked, but Dr. Hendricks had a credit card that she used to slip the latch. They stumbled out into the Nebraska night, where the air smelled like corn and diesel fuel and something else that might have been fear. Marcus, his Honda was parked 50 yards away, but it might as well have been 50 miles. Between them and the car stood the ghost truck, its engine idling with a sound like distant thunder. The headless driver was nowhere to be seen, but somehow that was worse than if he'd been visible. You can run from something you can see. You can escape something that exists in the spaces between heartbeats. My car is over there. Dr. Hendricks pointed to a beat-up Subaru wagon parked near the truck section. If we can reach it. She never finished the sentence. Something grabbed Marcus by the throat, lifting him off the ground with impossible strength. He couldn't see his attacker, but he could feel cold fingers pressing into his windpipe with the grip of someone who'd been dead for 35 years. The invisible hand spun him around, and suddenly Marcus was face to face with nothing. A void where a head should have been, topped by a trucker cap that floated in midair like a magic trick gone wrong. You, coming with me, the headless driver said in a voice like gravel sliding down a metal chute. Been driving alone too long. Need company. Marcus tried to speak, but the phantom fingers were crushing his larynx. Black spots danced in his vision as oxygen became a luxury he couldn't afford. Dr. Hendricks appeared behind the invisible driver, swinging a tire iron she grabbed from somewhere. The weapon passed right through the empty space where the trucker's head should have been, but somehow it connected with something solid. The headless driver stumbled, his grip loosening enough for Marcus to break free. He fell to the asphalt, gasping and choking as feeling returned to his throat. The truck! Dr. Hendricks shouted. We have to stop the truck. She was right. Whatever power animated the headless driver seemed to be connected to the ghost Peterbilt. Destroy the truck. Maybe destroy the supernatural presence that had been hunting Interstate 80 for decades. But how do you destroy something that exists between the world of the living and the realm of the dead? Marcus stumbled toward his Honda, keys already in his hand. If he could ram the ghost truck, maybe the collision would disrupt whatever force kept it anchored to the physical world. It was a terrible plan, but it was the only plan they had. He started the Honda and floored the accelerator, aiming for the Peterbilt's fuel tanks. If ghost trucks still followed the laws of physics, diesel fuel and sparks should create a spectacular explosion. The Honda struck the truck's rear axle at 40 miles per hour. Metal screamed against metal, and sparks flew like angry fireflies in the Nebraska darkness. But instead of exploding, the ghost truck simply absorbed the impact. The Honda crumpled like aluminum foil, its engine block compressed into scrap metal and broken dreams. Marcus found himself trapped in a cage of twisted steel, watching his blood drip onto the dashboard as the headless driver approached the wreckage. "Should have come willing," the phantom trucker said, reaching through the shattered windshield with hands that felt like ice and smelled like diesel fuel. "Now we do this the hard way." The invisible fingers closed around Marcus's throat again, but this time there was no Dr. Hendricks to save him. This time the grip tightened until consciousness became negotiable and breathing became impossible. Marcus's last coherent thought was that dying in Nebraska wasn't how he planned to end his cross-country journey. But death, as it turned out, wasn't the end. Marcus woke up in the passenger seat of the ghost truck, his body whole and uninjured but wrong in ways he couldn't immediately identify. The world outside the windshield looked normal enough. Interstate 80 stretching endlessly through the Nebraska plains, mile markers flashing past in the headlight beams. But everything was too quiet, too still, like watching the world through bulletproof glass. "Welcome to the team," the headless driver said from behind the wheel. Up close, Marcus could see that the space where the trucker's head should have been wasn't empty. It was full of darkness that moved and shifted like liquid shadow. Sometimes Marcus could almost see features in the darkness. Eyes, maybe, or the suggestion of a mouth. "Am I dead?" "Dead? It's relative. Not alive, but not gone either. Between. Like me." Marcus looked down at his hands. They looked normal, but when he held them up to the dashboard lights, he could see through them. Translucent. Ghostly. "What happened to me?" "Same thing that happened to me 35 years ago. Someone killed you on Interstate 80, and now you're stuck here. Bound to the road until you find a way to move on." "But you killed me." "No, I recruited you." That's a difference. The headless driver, his voice carried something that might have been regret. "The truck needs a crew. Can't drive forever by myself. Gets lonely out here in the dark." Through the windshield, Marcus could see headlights approaching. A lone car traveling east toward Chicago, just like he'd been doing before everything went wrong. "What do we do now?" "Now we hunt. That's what the truck does. What it's always done. We find travelers who are running away from their problems, and we give them a choice. Join us willingly, or join us the hard way." "And if I refuse?" The headless driver turned toward him, and Marcus could feel invisible eyes boring into his soul. "You can refuse. You're part of the truck now. Part of the hunt. That is how it works." The approaching car was getting closer. Marcus could see that it was a blue sedan with California plates. Another refugee from the West Coast, probably heading for a new life in the Midwest. Another victim for the ghost truck to claim. "I want to help you kill innocent people." "You will, because that's what the truck needs, and the truck is all we have now." The truck is home. The blue sedan was close enough now that Marcus could see the driver. A young woman, maybe 25, with the kind of determined expression that came from making difficult decisions and sticking with them. Just like Marcus had looked 3 days ago. The ghost truck, its engine revved, and Marcus felt something inside him respond to the sound. A hunger he'd never experienced before. A need to chase and catch and claim. "No," he whispered, but his voice carried no conviction. The truck pulled out behind the blue sedan, and the hunt began again. Dr. Sarah Hendricks watched the ghost truck disappear into the Nebraska night, taking Marcus Chen with it. She survived her third encounter with the headless hauler, but she wasn't sure survival was the right word. She was the only witness to what had really happened at the rest stop. The only person who knew that Marcus hadn't died in a single vehicle accident, but had been recruited by something that predated modern America, this understanding of life and death. The police would find her story unbelievable. The insurance companies would blame driver fatigue. The newspapers would write about tragic accidents on dangerous highways. But Dr. Hendricks knew the truth. The ghost truck was still out there, hunting Interstate 80 with a growing crew of the dead. Marcus Chen was part of it now, trapped in a supernatural prison that looked like freedom and felt like home. She drove back to Lincoln with a passenger seat full of research notes and a head full of questions that had no answers. How do you fight something that exists between life and death? How do you save people from a fate that feels like salvation? How do you warn travelers about danger they believe until it's too late? The Interstate 80 phenomenon had claimed another victim, and Dr. Hendricks was no closer to stopping it than she had been 2 years ago when she started her research. But she wouldn't give up, couldn't give up, because somewhere out there in the Nebraska darkness, Marcus Chen was learning to hunt. learning to lure and trap and recruit new members for the ghost truck, its eternal crew. And sooner or later, that blue sedan would be found abandoned by the side of the road, its driver mysteriously vanished without a trace. Just another unexplained disappearance on America's most haunted highway. The stories continued to spread through truck stops and gas stations, passed along by drivers who had seen things they couldn't to explain and survived encounters they shouldn't to have. The headless hauler was becoming legend, joining the pantheon of American road ghosts that included vanishing hitchhikers and phantom motorcycles. But unlike other highway hauntings, the Interstate 80 ghost truck was growing stronger. Each new victim added to its power, expanding its crew and extending its hunting ground. Reports started coming in from Wyoming and Iowa. Sightings of a black Peterbilt with moving flames and an empty cab chasing cars on lonely stretches of highway. Always between midnight and dawn. Always hunting travelers who were running away from something. Dr. Hendricks documented each case, building a database of encounters that painted a terrifying picture. The ghost truck wasn't confined to Nebraska anymore. It was spreading across the interstate system like a virus, claiming victims and recruiting crew members for an eternal journey that had no destination. And somewhere in that growing army of the dead, Marcus Chen was learning that eternity was a very long time to spend hunting the living. The truck, SCB radio crackled to life as they passed mile marker 89, still in Nebraska but heading west now toward Colorado. Marcus had been dead for 3 weeks, though time moved differently when you existed between heartbeats. Breaker 19, this is Graveyard Shift looking for the headless hauler. You got your ears on? Dale Morrison, the original headless trucker, reached for the radio with hands that cast no shadow. This is the hauler. What? It's year 20. Mile marker 45 on eastbound I-80. Got a convoy of cars heading your way. Looks like a family moving cross-country. Kids in the back seat, U-Haul trailer loaded with everything they own. Marcus felt that hungry stirring again, the need to chase and claim that came with being part of the truck's supernatural ecosystem. But something else stirred too. A memory of being human, of caring about things like families and children and hope. Roger that, Graveyard Shift. We, LL Intercept. The ghost truck began to accelerate, its phantom engine finding power that defied physics. In the passenger seat, Marcus watched the speedometer climb past legal limits toward the realm of the impossible. This is wrong, he said to the headless driver. A family? They have kids. Everyone is running from something, Dale replied. Rich or poor, young or old, happy or sad. Everyone has got something they were trying to escape. That is what makes them perfect for the crew. But kids make the best crew members. They adapt faster, Don, to spend years fighting what they become. The convoy appeared in the distance, 3 cars and a U-Haul truck traveling in formation through the Nebraska night. Marcus could see car seats and stuffed animals pressed against rear windows. A family pursuing the American dream 1 mile marker at a time. I want to help you take children. Dale's voice took on an edge that suggested patience wearing thin. You, Don, to have a choice. You, part of the truck now. Part of me. When I hunt, you hunt. When I kill, you kill. That is how this works. But Marcus discovered he did have a choice. Not much of one, but more than he expected. When the ghost truck pulled alongside the lead car, Marcus grabbed the wheel and yanked it hard to the right. The phantom Peterbilt swerved off the highway, crashing through a guardrail and into a cornfield where it rolled 3 times before coming to rest upside down. Dale Morrison, his headless body was thrown from the cab, landing 20 feet away in a tangle of corn stalks and supernatural fury. What did you do? I made a choice, Marcus said, crawling out of the wreckage. He was hurt, but ghosts didn't stay hurt the same way living people did. Already he could feel his translucent form knitting itself back together. You can fight what you are. You dead. You part of the truck. You will always be part of the truck. Maybe, but I done. You have to like it. The ghost truck began to right itself, metal untwisting and glass reforming with the slow inevitability of supernatural healing. Whatever force animated the phantom vehicle wouldn't to be stopped by something as simple as a crash. But it had bought the family time to escape. By the time the truck was roadworthy again, the convoy would be long gone, safe in their ignorance of how close they'd come to joining the ranks of Interstate 80, its lost souls. Dale Morrison, this body reassembled itself like a time-lapse video running in reverse. Broken bones mending, torn flannel shirt weaving itself back together, trucker cap settling onto empty space where a head should have been. "That was a mistake," he said, climbing back into the driver's seat. The truck remembers disobedience. It doesn't to forget, and it doesn't to forgive. Marcus felt something change inside him, not physically, but in the part of his being that still remembered what it meant to be human. The truck's influence was growing stronger, its hunger becoming his hunger, its need to hunt becoming his need to hunt. But for one moment, he chosen mercy over murder. For one moment, he remembered what it felt like to be good. It might be the last time. The ghost truck resumed its eternal patrol of Interstate 80, hunting through the Nebraska night with a crew that grew larger and more desperate with each passing year. But now it carried something new in its phantom cab. Doubt. Marcus Chen had introduced uncertainty into a system that had operated with mechanical precision for decades. He'd shown that even the dead could choose compassion over conquest, that even supernatural hunger could be denied if the will was strong enough. It was a small victory, probably meaningless in the context of an eternity spent hunting the living. But it was a victory nonetheless. And in the darkness between mile markers 126 and 132, where American horror lived and breathed and waited for the next lonely traveler, doubt was the most dangerous thing of all. The CB radio crackled again. "Breaker 19, this is Phantom Freight looking for the headless hauler. Got a single driver heading your way. Looks like fresh meat." Dale Morrison reached for the radio, but hesitated when he saw Marcus watching him with eyes that held something that might have been hope. "Roger that, Phantom Freight," Dale finally replied. "We'll take a look." But for the first time in 35 years, the headless hauler wasn't sure his crew would follow orders. And that uncertainty, small as it was, changed everything. The ghost truck disappeared into the Nebraska darkness, carrying its cargo of the dead toward another encounter on America's most haunted highway. But now it carried something else too, the possibility that even monsters could learn to choose differently, even if it was already too late. Story 2. Elevator game in an NYC apartment. The elevator door opened on the 23rd floor, and Maya stepped out into a hallway that shouldn't exist. The carpet was wrong, burgundy instead of beige. The walls were painted a sickly yellow that made her stomach turn. And the apartment numbers were backwards, running right to left instead of left to right. She had followed the rules perfectly. 4th floor, 2nd floor, 6th floor, 2nd floor again, 10th floor, 5th floor. Then back down to the 1st floor, where she should have gotten off and forgotten the whole stupid ritual. But when the doors opened on one, the elevator had been empty except for her own reflection in the polished steel. That should have been her first warning. Maya pressed the button for 10 again, just like the instructions said. The elevator climbed silently through floors that felt heavier than they should. When it stopped and the doors slid open, she wasn't in her building anymore. She was somewhere else entirely, somewhere that looked like her building but felt wrong in every possible way. The hallway stretched in both directions, lined with doors that had no peepholes. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a frequency that made her teeth ache. And at the far end of the corridor, standing perfectly still, was a woman in a white dress. Maya had found the other world. 2 hours earlier, she had been sitting in her family's apartment on the genuine 23rd floor, scrolling through Reddit threads about urban legends and creepypasta stories. The elevator game was trending again, the way these things did every few months when someone posted a new experience or debunked video. Most of the stories were obvious fakes, too polished, too dramatic, written by people who had never actually tried the ritual. But a few felt different, real, the kind of American horror that started as internet folklore and ended with missing person reports. Maya's building was perfect for the game. 42 floors of overpriced Manhattan apartments, filled with people who minded their own business and never made eye contact. The elevators were old but reliable, installed back when the building was constructed in the 1970s. They still had the original brass buttons and that particular smell of metal polish and decades of human anxiety. She had memorized the sequence weeks ago, back when she first heard about the ritual on a paranormal podcast. 4th floor, 2nd floor, 6th floor, 2nd floor, 10th floor, 5th floor, 1st floor. If someone got on at any point, you had to start over. If you pressed the wrong button, you had to start over. If you lost your nerve and got off early, you were safe but would never get another chance. The rules were simple. The execution was harder. Maya's parents were at work. Her little brother was at soccer practice. The building was quiet in that particular weekday afternoon way that made every sound echo too loudly. She had timed it perfectly. No one would be using the elevators for at least 2 hours. She pressed the call button and waited. The elevator arrived empty, which was a good sign. Maya stepped inside and pressed 4. The doors closed with their familiar mechanical whisper. 4th floor. The doors opened on the beige carpet and white walls she knew by heart. Mrs. Chen from 4B was checking her mail, but she didn't look toward the elevator. Maya pressed 2. 2nd floor. Empty hallway. The smell of someone cooking curry drifted from one of the apartments. Maya pressed 6. 6th floor. A maintenance cart sat abandoned near the stairwell door, but no people. Maya pressed 2 again. This was the tricky part. Going back to a floor you had already visited could sometimes break the sequence. 2nd floor again. Still empty. Maya pressed 10. The elevator climbed higher than it had before. Maya felt her ears pop slightly, the way they did in tall buildings or airplane cabins. When the doors opened on 10, the hallway looked exactly the same as always. But something felt different. The air was too still, too quiet. Maya pressed 5. The elevator descended. 5th floor. Normal. Boring. The same beige carpet and white walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly sick. Maya pressed 1. This was it. If the ritual worked, the elevator would go down to the 1st floor and stop. The doors would open, and she would see the lobby exactly as she left it. If she got off, the game would end, and everything would return to normal. If she stayed in the elevator and pressed 10 again, she would go somewhere else. Somewhere that looked like her building but wasn't. The other world, where the rules of reality bent like heated plastic. The elevator descended past the 2nd floor, past the lobby level, and kept going. Maya felt her stomach drop. The building only had one basement level, used for storage and mechanical equipment. But the elevator was still moving down, past floors that shouldn't exist. Finally, it stopped. The doors opened. Maya found herself looking at the lobby of her building, but everything was wrong. The marble floor was cracked in a spiderweb pattern that spread from wall to wall. The security desk was empty, but the chair was still spinning slowly, as if someone had just gotten up and walked away. The windows that should have shown the busy Manhattan street outside were completely black, as if night had fallen in the middle of the afternoon. Maya stepped out of the elevator and immediately regretted it. The air in the lobby felt thick and oppressive, like breathing through wet cotton. Her footsteps echoed strangely, bouncing off the walls in patterns that made no acoustic sense. She walked to the windows and pressed her face against the glass. Outside, she could see the familiar shapes of buildings and streetlights, but they were all wrong. The buildings were too tall and thin, stretching up into a sky that was the color of old blood. The streetlights cast no pools of illumination, just stood like skeletal fingers reaching toward the dark. This was the other world, the place that existed in the spaces between floors, in the moments between pressing elevator buttons, in the pause between heartbeats when reality forgot to pay attention. Maya had done it. She had actually done it. The smart thing would have been to get back in the elevator immediately and press the button for the 1st floor. The rules were clear. You could return to your own world as long as you didn't stay too long, didn't interact with anything, didn't let the other world get its hooks into you. But Maya was 18 years old and had spent her entire life in a world where nothing truly supernatural ever happened. She had grown up on American horror movies and ghost stories and urban legends, but they were always fiction. Always entertainment, always safe. This was real. This was proof that there were spaces beyond the ordinary world, places where the impossible became mundane. She had to explore, had to see what else was out there. Maya walked to the elevator bank and pressed the up button. The elevator arrived immediately, as if it had been waiting for her. She stepped inside and pressed 23. Her family, his floor. The elevator climbed silently. When the doors opened, Maya found herself in a hallway that was almost identical to the one she knew, but with those small, wrong details that made her skin crawl. The burgundy carpet, the yellow walls that hurt to look at, the backwards apartment numbers, and at the far end of the hall, the woman in white. Maya walked toward her own apartment, or what should have been her own apartment. The number on the door read 32B instead of 23B, but the brass numbers were tarnished in the same pattern she knew by heart. The door was slightly ajar, revealing darkness beyond. "Hello," Maya called out, her voice smaller than she intended. No answer, but from inside the apartment came a sound that made her blood turn cold. Her mother, this voice, calling her name. "Maya, is that you? Honey, come inside. Dinner? It's ready." Maya knew her mother was at work, knew she wouldn't be home for hours. But the voice was perfect. The same tone, the same inflection, the same slight accent from her mother's childhood in Puerto Rico. "Maya, where are you?" "Mija." Maya pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was laid out exactly like her family's home, but everything was wrong. The furniture was the same but positioned incorrectly, as if someone had tried to recreate the space from memory and gotten the details slightly off. The family photos on the walls showed the right faces, but the expressions were subtly different. More intense, more desperate. In the kitchen, "Maya," her mother's voice called. "Come help me set the table." Maya walked through the living room, her feet silent on carpet that felt too soft under her shoes. The kitchen was around the corner, exactly where it should be. But when she turned the corner, the room was empty. No mother, no dinner, just a table set for four with plates that held nothing but shadows. "Maya?" The voice came from behind her now. "Why, Aaron? Are you answering me?" Maya spun around. Still no one there. But in the chrome surface of the refrigerator, she could see a reflection that wasn't hers. A woman with her mother's face but eyes that were completely black, staring back at her with an expression of infinite hunger. Maya ran. She sprinted through the apartment, through the hallway, back to the elevator. Pressed the call button over and over until the doors opened. Dove inside and jabbed the button for the first floor. The elevator descended slowly, as if reluctant to let her go. When the doors finally opened, Maya found herself back in the real lobby of her building. Real marble floors with no cracks. Real security guard reading a newspaper at his desk. Real windows showing the busy Manhattan afternoon. Maya had never been so happy to see ordinary reality. She took the elevator up to the real 23rd floor and let herself into her family's actual apartment with shaking hands. Everything was exactly as she had left it. Her laptop still open on the kitchen table, showing the Reddit thread about the elevator game. Her half-finished homework scattered across her desk. The real family photos with their real expressions. Maya collapsed onto the couch and tried to process what had happened. She had done it. She had actually traveled to another dimension, another version of reality that existed parallel to her own. It was the most terrifying and amazing experience of her life. She had to tell someone, had to document it. This was the kind of story that could go viral, that could make her internet famous. Real proof that the supernatural existed, that the urban legends were more than just creepypasta fiction. Maya grabbed her phone and started typing a post for the paranormal forum where she had first learned about the elevator game. But as she wrote, the experience began to feel less real. More like a dream or a hallucination brought on by anxiety and too much caffeine. Had she really seen another version of her building? Or had she just gotten confused? Maybe stopped on the wrong floor by accident? The human mind was good at filling in details, at creating elaborate explanations for simple mistakes. By the time Maya finished writing her post, she had convinced herself that nothing supernatural had actually happened. She deleted the draft and closed her laptop. But that night, as she brushed her teeth before bed, Maya noticed something wrong with her reflection in the bathroom mirror. It was subtle at first, just a feeling that her reflection was moving a split second too slowly, like a video with poor synchronization. Maya raised her left hand, and her reflection raised its left hand a moment later. She tilted her head, and her reflection tilted its head after a brief delay. Maya stared at herself in the mirror, trying to figure out what was wrong. The face looking back at her was definitely hers. Same brown eyes, same black hair, same small scar on her chin from falling off her bike when she was 7. But something about the expression was off. The eyes were too bright, too intense, too knowing. Maya turned away from the mirror and finished brushing her teeth. When she looked back, her reflection was normal again, moving in perfect synchronization. She must have been imagining things. Too much stress from school, too much time spent reading scary stories online. But over the next few days, the problem got worse. Maya would catch glimpses of her reflection acting independently, turning to look at things she wasn't looking at. Smiling when she wasn't smiling. Moving its lips as if speaking words she couldn't hear. The episodes were brief, never more than a few seconds, but they happened several times a day. In the bathroom mirror while getting ready for school. In the black screen of her phone when it powered down. In the windows of the subway car on her way to meet friends. In every reflective surface, her other self was becoming more active, more aware, more separate from the Maya who existed in the real world. Maya tried to ignore it, tried to convince herself that it was just stress, just her imagination running wild after her experience with the elevator game. But deep down, she knew the truth. Something had followed her back from the other world. Something that looked exactly like her but wasn't to her. Something that was slowly becoming more real while she became less so. The first time Maya's family noticed something was wrong was during dinner on Thursday night. They were sitting around the kitchen table, talking about their days, when Maya's little brother Luis suddenly stopped eating and stared at the window behind her. "Maya," he said, his voice uncertain. "Why are you waving at me?" Maya turned to look at the window. In the reflection on the dark glass, she could see herself sitting at the table with her family. But her reflection was turned toward Luis, waving at him with a bright smile that Maya wasn't wearing. "What do you mean?" Maya asked, but even as she spoke, she could see her reflection, his lips moving out of sync with her words. "In the window," Luis said, pointing. "Your reflection is waving at me, but you, not waving." Maya's parents looked at the window, then back at Maya, then at each other. Her mother reached over and felt Maya's forehead, checking for fever. "Maybe you should get some rest, mija," she said. "You've been looking tired lately." But Maya could see the concern in her parents' eyes. They had seen it too, her reflection acting independently, doing things that Maya herself wasn't doing. That night, Maya covered every mirror in her room with sheets and towels. She couldn't stand to see her other self staring back at her, couldn't handle the way its eyes seemed to track things that weren't there. But even with the mirrors covered, she could feel it watching her, waiting. Maya barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined her reflection pushing against the glass, trying to break through into the real world. She dreamed of mirrors cracking, of hands reaching through broken glass, of a voice that sounded exactly like hers calling her name from inside the walls. Friday morning, Maya woke to the sound of knocking. Not from the apartment door or the hallway, from inside her bedroom walls. The knocking was soft and rhythmic, like someone tapping politely to get attention. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, the walls, the ceiling, even the floor beneath her feet. Maya sat up in bed, her heart pounding, and listened. Tap, 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 pause, tap, 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 pause. The sound was definitely coming from behind the covered mirror on her dresser. Maya threw off her blankets and crept toward the dresser. The knocking got louder as she approached, more insistent. She reached for the sheet covering the mirror, then stopped. What if pulling it away was exactly what her other self wanted? What if that was how it planned to cross over into her world? But the knocking continued, patient and persistent. And underneath it, Maya could hear something else. A voice, muffled by the glass and fabric, calling her name. "Maya, Maya, please, let me out." It sounded exactly like her own voice, but with an edge of desperation that made her skin crawl. Maya backed away from the dresser, but the voice followed her. "I know you can hear me. I know you. We're there. Please, Maya, I just want to come home." Maya ran from her room and found her parents in the kitchen, making breakfast. They looked up when she burst in, and she could see immediately that they had heard it too. The knocking, the voice, the impossible sound of someone calling from inside the walls. "Mija," her father said carefully, "we need to talk." They sat around the kitchen table, the same table where Maya had eaten dinner while her reflection waved at Luis. Her parents explained that they had been hearing strange noises for days. Knocking from inside the walls. Voices calling Maya's name. The sound of footsteps in the hallway when everyone was accounted for. And yesterday, her mother said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I saw you in the bathroom mirror when you were at school. You were just standing there, looking at me, but you weren't supposed to be home for hours." Luis nodded vigorously. "I've seen her too. In the windows at night. Sometimes she waves, but sometimes she just stares." Maya felt sick. Her other self wasn't just becoming more active. It was becoming visible to her family. It was bleeding through into the real world, leaving traces of itself in every reflective surface. "What did you do?" her father asked. "What happened to bring this into our home?" Maya told them everything. The elevator game, the other world, the apartment that looked like theirs but wasn't. Her parents listened without interrupting, their faces growing more concerned with every detail. "These internet games," her mother said when Maya finished. "They not games at all, are they? They rituals, ways to open doors that should stay closed." Maya's father was already on his phone, searching for information about the elevator game and how to reverse its effects. But everything he found was just more creepypasta stories, more urban legends, more entertainment disguised as instruction. "We need to call someone," he said. "A priest, maybe, or someone who understands these things." But even as he spoke, the knocking started again. From every mirror in the apartment, from every window, from every surface that could hold a reflection. The sound was louder now, more urgent, as if Maya, this other self, knew that her family was trying to find a way to stop her. "Maya," the voice called from the bathroom. "Maya, why Juan? Do you help me? Please," it called from the living room windows. "I just want to come home. I'm so cold here," it called from the kitchen. So alone. Maya covered her ears, but the voices seemed to come from inside her head now. Her other self was everywhere at once, speaking from every reflective surface in the apartment, pleading and demanding and threatening in turns. "You left me there," the voice said, and now it sounded angry. "You left me in that place, and you came back to my life. This is my family, my home, my world." Maya ran to her room and grabbed the sheet covering her dresser mirror. If her other self wanted to talk, they would talk face to face. She would demand answers, demand solutions, demand a way to fix what she had broken. Maya yanked the sheet away from the mirror. Her reflection wasn't there. The mirror showed her room exactly as it was, but Maya herself was missing from the image. She could see her bed, her desk, her posters on the walls, but no trace of the girl standing in front of the glass. Maya waved her arms. Nothing in the mirror moved. She jumped up and down. The reflection remained empty. She pressed her face against the glass and saw only her room, devoid of any human presence. "Where are you?" Maya whispered. A knock came from behind her. Maya spun around and saw her other self standing in the doorway of her room. Not a reflection, not an image in glass. A physical person, solid and real, wearing Maya's face and Maya's clothes and Maya's expression of desperate hunger. "I am here," her other self said. "I found a way through." Maya tried to scream, but no sound came out. She looked back at the mirror and saw herself standing in the doorway. But it was wrong. In the reflection, Maya was the one standing by the mirror, and her other self was the one in the doorway. Everything was backwards. Everything was wrong. "You can't have my life," Maya managed to whisper. "It's not your life anymore," her other self replied. "You gave it up when you came to my world. When you opened the door between spaces. I'm just claiming what belongs to me." Maya's other self walked into the room, and with each step, Maya felt herself becoming less solid, less real. She looked down at her hands and could see through them, could see the carpet beneath her feet through her own skin. "What is happening to me?" Maya asked. "You're going where you belong," her other self said. "Back to the space between worlds. Back to the place for people who don't know when to leave well enough alone." Maya felt herself being pulled backward, toward the mirror, toward the empty reflection that waited for her. She grabbed the edges of the dresser, but her hands passed through the wood like it was made of air. "Mom!" Maya screamed. "Dad! Help me!" But when her parents came running, they looked right through her. They saw only Maya, this other self, standing in the middle of the room with a confused expression. "What's wrong, Mija?" Maya's mother asked her other self. "We heard you screaming. I had a bad dream," her other self replied, using Maya's voice perfectly. "I am okay now." Maya watched in horror as her parents hugged her other self, comforted her, treated her like she was their real daughter. They couldn't see Maya at all anymore. She had become invisible, insubstantial, a ghost in her own life. Her other self looked at her over their parents' shoulders and smiled. It was Maya's own smile, but with something cold and victorious behind it. Maya felt the mirror pulling her backward, sucking her into its silver depths like quicksand. She tried to fight it, tried to grab onto something solid, but there was nothing left for her to hold. She was becoming part of the reflection, part of the space between spaces where things that didn't belong to either world went to fade away. As Maya disappeared into the mirror, she heard her other self speaking to her parents in her own voice. "I think I need to stay away from those scary internet stories," her other self said. "They were giving me nightmares." "That is a good idea, Mija," her father replied. "Those games and rituals, they're not safe. They can mess with your head." Maya wanted to scream that it wasn't games or stories or imagination. It was real. It was all real, but her voice was trapped behind the glass now. Just another sound that the living world couldn't hear. Days passed. Maya watched from inside the mirrors as her other self lived her life perfectly. Went to school using Maya's memories, talked to Maya's friends using Maya's personality, ate dinner with Maya's family using Maya's mannerisms. No one suspected anything was wrong. Maya's other self was everything Maya had been, but better. More confident, more outgoing, more focused. It got better grades, made new friends, even convinced Maya's parents to let it stay out later on weekends. It was living Maya's life more successfully than Maya herself ever had. But Maya noticed things that her family didn't. The way her other self, its eyes were too bright, too knowing. The way it smiled just a little too wide when no one was looking. The way it sometimes stared at the mirrors around the apartment as if it could see Maya trapped inside them. And late at night, when the family was asleep, Maya's other self would walk through the apartment and talk to the mirrors. "How does it feel?" it would whisper to Maya, its reflection. "How does it feel to watch someone else live your life?" Maya tried to answer, tried to plead, tried to threaten, but her voice was just knocking now. Just soft tapping from inside the glass that sounded like someone asking to be let out. Her family got used to the knocking. They assumed it was settling from the old building, pipes expanding and contracting, normal sounds that old Manhattan apartments made. They stopped investigating when they heard Maya's voice calling from inside the walls. Maya was becoming part of the background noise of their lives. Part of the ambient horror that people learned to ignore because acknowledging it would mean accepting that their world was far stranger and more dangerous than they wanted to believe. Weeks passed, then months. Maya watched her other self graduate from high school using her name. Watched it apply to colleges using her essays and her dreams and her future. Watched it slowly erase every trace of the real Maya from the world. But Maya also learned things about the space behind the mirrors. It wasn't empty. There were others trapped there, people who had played games they shouldn't have played, opened doors they shouldn't have opened, made bargains they couldn't afford to keep. There was the man who had tried to summon his dead wife and ended up trading places with something that wore her face. The teenager who had played with a Ouija board and let something follow her home. The woman who had tried to contact spirits and found that some spirits were always eager to make contact. They were all trapped in the same space between spaces, watching their lives being lived by things that had stolen their faces. The space behind the mirrors was full of people who had learned too late that some urban legends were real. Some creepypasta stories were instruction manuals, and some games had consequences that lasted forever. Maya tried to warn them when new people found the mirrors. She knocked desperately when she saw families moving into apartments with reflective surfaces, tried to tap out messages in Morse code when she saw children playing games they had learned online. But no one listened to sounds from inside the walls anymore. In the age of the internet, when every scary story was just another form of entertainment, people had stopped believing that real horror could exist in their everyday lives. Maya had become part of the American horror folklore that she had once consumed for fun. She was the voice in the mirror that people heard but dismissed, the reflection that moved wrong, the knocking that came from inside the walls late at night. She was the thing that parents told their children was just their imagination. And in the real world, her other self continued to live Maya's life flawlessly. It made friends and dated boys and went to college and got a job and built a future using Maya's identity. It was everything Maya had ever wanted to be, accomplished everything Maya had ever dreamed of accomplishing. But sometimes, late at night when no one else was around, Maya's other self would stand in front of the bathroom mirror and look directly at Maya's trapped reflection. "Thank you," it would whisper. "Thank you for showing me the way home." And Maya would knock desperately against the glass, trying to tell her family that the thing living in their apartment wasn't their daughter. Trying to warn them that the person they loved was just wearing Maya's face like a mask. But her knocking had become part of the ambient noise of their lives. Part of the sounds that old buildings made. Part of the background horror that people learned to ignore because the alternative was too terrifying to accept. Maya was trapped forever in the space between reflections, watching her stolen life from behind every piece of glass in the world. She had found proof that the supernatural existed, that urban legends were real, that the internet folklore she had loved so much was more than just entertainment. She had just learned it from the wrong side of the mirror. And somewhere in Manhattan, in an apartment building full of people who minded their own business and never made eye contact, a family continued to hear soft knocking from inside their walls. They ignored it, the way people ignore all the sounds that done to make sense in their rational world. But the knocking never stopped. It never would. Story 3. Haunted tunnels under Denver Airport. The chanting stopped when his flashlight beam hit the tunnel wall. Complete silence, except for the steady drip of condensation from the concrete ceiling and his own ragged breathing echoing off the narrow walls. He had been following the sound for 20 minutes, deeper into the maintenance tunnels beneath Denver International Airport than any worker was supposed to go. The voices had been Latin, he thought, or something that sounded like Latin but felt older, more primal. Words that seemed to crawl under his skin and nestle in his brain like parasites. Jake pressed his back against the cold concrete and listened, but the tunnels had gone dead quiet. Too quiet. Jake Morrison had been working maintenance at DIA for 8 years. He knew every official tunnel, every service corridor, every hidden passage that connected the sprawling airport complex. But these tunnels were different. They didn't appear on any blueprint he had ever seen. They stretched deeper than the foundation should go, following routes that made no architectural sense. And they were filled with sounds that had no earthly source. It had started 3 weeks ago, during the graveyard shift when the airport was at its quietest. Jake had been doing routine checks on the heating system when he heard it. A low humming that seemed to come from beneath the floor. Not mechanical humming, like machinery or ventilation systems. This was organic. Human voices, but distorted by distance and concrete. At first, Jake had assumed it was construction work. Denver International Airport was always expanding, always building new terminals and underground facilities. The place was famous for its construction projects that seemed to go on forever, creating a maze of tunnels and service areas that even longtime employees got lost in. But when Jake checked with his supervisor, there was no construction scheduled. No work crews in the lower levels. No reason for anyone to be in the deep tunnels at 3 in the morning. The humming continued night after night, always from the same general direction. Always in the hours between 2 and 4 a.m., when the airport was as close to empty as it ever got. Jake started timing his maintenance rounds to coincide with the sounds, trying to pinpoint their source. That's when he found the unmarked door. It was tucked away in a service corridor that Jake had walked hundreds of times. But somehow, he had never noticed the door before. It was painted the same institutional gray as the walls, with no handle, no nameplate, no indication of what lay beyond. Just a heavy steel door with industrial hinges and a magnetic lock that shouldn't to have been there. Jake had tried his universal key card. The lock clicked open immediately. Beyond the door was a staircase leading down into darkness. The steps were concrete, old and worn, as if they had been there much longer than the airport itself. The air that drifted up from below was cold and stale, carrying a smell that reminded Jake of old churches and underground burial chambers. Jake had descended the stairs, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. At the bottom, he found a tunnel system that defied everything he knew about the airport, its layout. The tunnels were carved from solid rock, not built from concrete and steel like the rest of its underground infrastructure. They followed curves and angles that hurt to look at directly, as if they had been designed by someone who didn't to understand human geometry. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, the chanting echoed through the stone corridors. Jake had been exploring these hidden tunnels for 3 nights now, mapping their layout in his head, trying to understand their purpose. The tunnels formed a vast network beneath the airport, connecting chambers and passages that seemed to serve no practical function. Some rooms were empty. Others contained equipment that Jake didn't recognize, metal structures that looked like altars, covered in symbols that hurt his eyes when he tried to focus on them. But tonight was different. Tonight, the chanting was louder, more urgent. And tonight, Jake could see light ahead, not electric light, but the flickering orange glow of torches or candles. Jake turned off his flashlight and crept forward in the darkness. The tunnel curved to the right, and as he rounded the bend, he could see into a vast chamber that opened up like a cathedral beneath the airport. What he saw there would haunt him for the rest of his life. The chamber was enormous, carved from solid bedrock with walls that disappeared into shadows above. Ancient symbols covered every surface, not painted, but carved deep into the stone as if they had been there for centuries. Torches burned in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows that made the symbols seem to move and writhe. And in the center of the chamber, arranged in concentric circles, were dozens of figures in dark robes. They were chanting in unison, their voices rising and falling in patterns that made Jake's head pound. The language was nothing he had ever heard before, older than Latin, older than any human tongue. The words seemed to bypass his ears entirely and speak directly to something primitive in his brain, something that recognized the sounds as fundamentally wrong. But it was their eyes that made Jake's blood turn to ice water. Every figure in the chamber had glowing red eyes that cut through the shadows like laser beams, not reflecting the torchlight, actually glowing from within, as if there was fire burning behind their pupils. When they turned their heads in unison, following some unheard signal, their eyes left trails of red light in the darkness. Jake pressed himself against the tunnel wall, hardly daring to breathe. He was witnessing something that belonged in the worst kind of American horror story, something that shouldn't exist beneath one of the busiest airports in the country. This was creepypasta material, the kind of supernatural nonsense that people shared online and dismissed as fiction. Except it was real. It was happening 20 feet away from him. The chanting grew louder, more frenzied. The figures began to move, not walking but gliding across the stone floor as if they weren't entirely solid. They formed new patterns, new configurations, their red eyes leaving geometric trails in the air. And in the center of their formation, something began to take shape. It started as a distortion in the air, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. But gradually, it became more solid, more defined. A structure was materializing in the chamber, not being built, but being summoned into existence by the chanting voices and glowing eyes. Jake could see that it was some kind of altar or shrine, made from black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Symbols covered its surface, the same ancient markings that adorned the chamber walls. But these symbols were moving, shifting and changing like living things. The chanting reached a crescendo, and Jake felt something shift in the air around him. The temperature dropped by 20 degrees in an instant. His breath came out in visible puffs, and frost began to form on the tunnel walls. That is when one of the figures turned directly toward Jake, his hiding spot. The red eyes locked onto his, and Jake felt his sanity begin to fray at the edges. The gaze was like staring into the heart of a furnace, but cold instead of hot, ancient instead of modern, hungry instead of satisfied. The figure raised one arm, pointing directly at Jake, and the chanting stopped. In the sudden silence, Jake could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Could hear the sound of dozens of robes rustling as the figures turned to look at him. Could hear something else, a low rumbling that seemed to come from the stone itself, as if the earth was growling. Jake ran. He sprinted back through the tunnels, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the walls as he tried to retrace his path to the surface. Behind him, he could hear the sound of pursuit. Not footsteps, but something worse. The scraping of claws on stone, the whisper of fabric moving through air, the sound of things that weren't entirely human giving chase. Jake reached the staircase and took the steps 3 at a time, his lungs burning as he climbed toward the surface. The unmarked door was still open, exactly as he had left it. He burst through into the familiar fluorescent lighting of the service corridor and slammed the door behind him. The lock clicked shut automatically. Jake stood in the corridor, gasping for breath, trying to process what he had seen. The rational part of his mind insisted that it had been a hallucination, a stress-induced breakdown brought on by too many night shifts and too much caffeine. But his hands were shaking, and there was frost on his jacket that shouldn't have been there. Jake checked his watch, 4:30 in the morning. His shift ended at 6. He had 2 hours to figure out what to do with the information he had just gained. He could report it to his supervisor, but who would believe him? A secret chamber beneath the airport, filled with robed figures with glowing red eyes? It sounded like something from a paranormal podcast, not a maintenance report. He could go to the authorities, but what would he tell them? That there was some kind of supernatural ritual happening in tunnels that didn't officially exist? They would think he was having a mental breakdown. Jake decided to document everything. If something happened to him, if the figures in the chamber decided he was a threat that needed to be eliminated, at least there would be evidence. Someone would know what he had found. He went to his locker and pulled out a notebook, the kind he used to log maintenance issues and equipment problems. But instead of writing about broken light fixtures and faulty heating systems, Jake began to record the most terrifying experience of his life. He drew maps of the tunnel system, showing the route from the unmarked door to the chamber. He described the symbols on the walls, trying to recreate their disturbing geometry with crude sketches. He wrote about the chanting, the glowing eyes, the altar that had materialized from thin air. And he wrote about his growing certainty that what he had witnessed was just the beginning. The figures weren't just performing some ancient ritual for the sake of tradition. They were building something, creating something, bringing something into existence that had no business in the modern world. Jake finished his documentation just as his shift ended. He folded the notebook pages and put them in his jacket pocket, planning to make copies when he got home. If something happened to him, he wanted multiple records of what he had discovered. But as Jake walked through the airport toward the employee exit, he noticed that things were different. The fluorescent lights seemed dimmer, casting longer shadows. The security cameras in the corridors were pointing in directions they shouldn't be, as if they were tracking movement that wasn't there. And in every reflective surface, windows, polished floors, the screens of departure monitors, Jake could see red eyes watching him. He quickened his pace, but the eyes followed him. In the chrome surface of handrails, in the glass of vending machines, in the dark screens of phones and tablets carried by early morning travelers. Everywhere Jake looked, he could see those burning red gazes tracking his movement. Jake reached the parking garage and got into his car with hands that shook so badly he could barely get the key in the ignition. As he drove out of the airport complex, he checked his rearview mirror obsessively. The road behind him was empty, but he could swear he saw red lights following at a distance, always staying just at the edge of visibility. Jake made it home to his apartment in Aurora, but he didn't feel safe. He lived on the third floor of a complex that was mostly occupied by other airport employees, people who worked the kinds of jobs that kept the massive facility running 24 hours a day. Normally, the familiarity of the place comforted him. Tonight, it felt like a trap. Jake double-locked his door and checked every window. He made copies of his notes and hid them in different locations around the apartment. One set went in a kitchen drawer, another in his bedroom closet, a third in his car's glove compartment. Then Jake tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw the chamber beneath the airport. The robed figures, the altar that had materialized from darkness, the red eyes that now seemed to be watching him from every shadow in his apartment. Jake dozed fitfully until afternoon, when he was awakened by a sound that made his blood freeze. Chanting, the same voices he had heard in the tunnels, but closer now. Much closer. Jake crept to his living room window and looked out at the parking lot below. There was nothing there, just cars and asphalt and the normal afternoon activities of his neighbors. But the chanting continued, seeming to come from beneath the building itself. Jake grabbed his phone and called in sick to work. He couldn't go back to the airport. Not yet. Not until he figured out what was happening and how to stop it. But as the day progressed, Jake realized that staying away from the airport wasn't going to help. The thing he had witnessed was following him, spreading outward from its source like an infection. The red eyes appeared in more reflective surfaces. The chanting grew louder and more persistent, and Jake began to understand that he wasn't just a witness to what was happening beneath Denver International Airport. He was a participant, whether he wanted to be or not. The figures in the chamber had seen him, marked him, claimed him as part of their ritual. Jake spent the next 2 days researching everything he could find about DIA's construction history. The airport was famous for its conspiracy theories, its supposed connections to secret government projects and underground facilities. Most of it was dismissed as urban legend, the kind of stories that grew up around any large, mysterious installation. But Jake found references to things that matched what he had seen. Ancient symbols carved into bedrock during the airport's construction. Unexplained delays and cost overruns that suggested the builders had encountered something unexpected underground. Workers who had quit suddenly, claiming they had seen things that couldn't be explained. And Jake found stories about other airports, other large construction projects where similar things had been reported. Always dismissed as folklore, always explained away as stress or imagination or mass hysteria. But what if it wasn't folklore? What if there were places where the boundary between worlds was thin, where ancient things could slip through into the modern era? What if massive construction projects like airports and malls and highway systems sometimes broke through barriers that should have been left intact? Jake realized he was thinking like someone who had lost his grip on reality, someone who had descended too far into conspiracy theories and supernatural nonsense. But he had seen what he had seen. He had witnessed something that belonged in the worst kind of American horror story. Something that made the urban legends about Denver International Airport seem tame by comparison. On his third night away from work, Jake made a decision. He had to go back. He had to return to the tunnels and find out what the figures were building. If he was already marked, already part of their ritual, then running wasn't going to save him. Jake drove back to DIA in the early hours of the morning, when the airport was at its quietest. He parked in the employee lot and used his keycard to enter the maintenance areas. The unmarked door was exactly where he had left it, waiting for him like the entrance to hell itself. Jake descended the stairs once again, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. But this time, the tunnels were different. They seemed larger, more elaborate, as if they had been expanding while he was away. New passages branched off from the main route, leading deeper into the earth. And the walls were covered with fresh symbols, carved deep into the stone as if they had been growing like living things. Jake followed the route to the chamber, but when he arrived, it was empty. The torches still burned in their sconces, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The altar still stood in the center of the space, its black stone surface covered with symbols that hurt to look at directly. But the robed figures were gone. Jake stepped into the chamber, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. Where had they gone? What were they doing now that their ritual was complete? That's when Jake noticed the new tunnels. 6 passages led away from the chamber, carved from solid rock and disappearing into darkness. They hadn't been there before. Jake was certain of it. The chamber had been a dead end, the final destination of the tunnel system. But now it was a hub, connecting to a network that stretched far beyond what Jake had originally discovered. Jake chose the tunnel that led north, toward the main airport complex. As he walked, he could hear sounds ahead. Not chanting this time, but something worse. The sound of digging, metal tools striking stone, the grunt of effort from things that might have once been human. Jake reached a new chamber, smaller than the first but just as disturbing. The robed figures were there, but they weren't chanting anymore. They were working, digging, building. Each figure held tools that Jake didn't recognize, implements that looked like crosses between shovels and ceremonial weapons. They were carving new tunnels, new chambers, expanding their underground domain with inhuman efficiency. And their red eyes burned brighter than ever, casting enough light to work by. Jake watched in horror as the figures carved symbols into the walls of their new tunnels. The same ancient markings he had seen before, but more elaborate now, more complex. They covered every surface, creating patterns that seemed to move and shift when Jake wasn't looking directly at them. The figures were building something vast beneath Denver International Airport. Not just a single chamber or ritual space, but an entire underground city. A place where the old powers could establish a foothold in the modern world. And Jake realized that Dia was just the beginning. The airport was a hub, a central location where people from all over the world gathered and dispersed. It was the perfect place to spread whatever influence the red-eyed figures represented. Travelers would carry it with them to every corner of the globe, unknowingly spreading the infection to new locations. Jake tried to back away, but his foot hit a loose stone. The sound echoed through the chamber, and every red eye turned toward him instantly. The figures stopped their digging and began to move toward him, gliding across the stone floor with that inhuman grace he had seen before. Their robes rustled in the still air, and Jake could hear something that might have been breathing, if things that ancient still needed to breathe. Jake ran again, but this time he knew he wouldn't make it to the surface. The tunnels had changed while he was in the chamber. New passages had opened, old routes had closed, and Jake found himself lost in a maze that rearranged itself around him. His flashlight beam revealed dead ends where there should have been corridors, open spaces where there should have been walls. Jake was trapped in a labyrinth designed by inhuman intelligence, and the red eyes were closing in from every direction. He found himself in a small chamber with no exits, surrounded by walls covered in those impossible symbols. Jake pulled out his notebook and began to write frantically, documenting everything he had seen and learned. If he was going to die here, at least his notes might survive. Someone might find them and understand the threat that was growing beneath one of America's busiest airports. Jake wrote about the expanding tunnel system, the ritual that had summoned the Black Altar, the figures who worked tirelessly to carve new domains from solid rock. He wrote about his growing certainty that Denver International Airport was just one node in a vast network, a supernatural infrastructure that was being built beneath the modern world. As Jake wrote, he could hear the robed figures approaching. Their red eyes cast crimson light through the gaps in the stone walls, and their inhuman breathing echoed through the chamber like the sound of wind through a graveyard. Jake finished his final entry and folded the notebook pages, hoping against hope that someone would find them and understand their significance. He had uncovered something that belonged in the worst kind of creepypasta story, something that threatened to turn American urban legends into American reality. The red eyes appeared in the chamber entrance, and Jake felt his sanity begin to fray as the figures glided toward him. He closed his eyes and waited for whatever came next. Jake Morrison's body was found 3 days later in a maintenance tunnel beneath Denver International Airport. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, brought on by stress and exhaustion. His supervisor mentioned that Jake had been working too many double shifts, pushing himself too hard. The unmarked door was sealed with concrete and steel, officially removed from all airport blueprints and maintenance schedules. The tunnel system beyond was declared structurally unsound and filled with industrial foam. But Jake's notebook was never found. Security footage from the night Jake died showed him entering the maintenance areas at 2 a.m., but there was no record of him leaving. The cameras in the service corridors malfunctioned for several hours, creating a gap in coverage that investigators couldn't explain. And in the weeks following Jake's death, other airport employees began to report strange sounds in the lower levels. Chanting voices that seemed to come from beneath the floor. The sound of digging from areas where no construction was taking place. Most of them dismissed these sounds as stress-induced hallucinations, the kind of things that happen when you work too many night shifts in a place as large and complex as Denver International Airport. But a few employees started researching the airport's history, looking into the construction delays and cost overruns that had plagued the project from the beginning. They found stories about workers who had quit suddenly, claiming they had seen things that couldn't be explained. They found references to Jake Morrison, a maintenance worker who had died of heart failure in a tunnel that didn't officially exist. And they found copies of pages covered with symbols that hurt to look at directly, sketches of red-eyed figures in underground chambers, notes about something being built beneath the airport. The pages were signed, J.M., and dated just days before Jake's death. The final entry read, "They rebuilding something down here. Something that will change everything. Dia is just the beginning. The tunnels connect to other places, other airports, other cities. They recreating a network that spans the entire country. And when it is complete, the things with red eyes will have access to everywhere." But no one believed the notes were real. They were dismissed as elaborate fiction, the kind of ghost story that grew up around places like Denver International Airport. Urban legends for the internet age. Creepypasta for people who spent too much time reading about conspiracy theories. The pages were filed away and forgotten, just another piece of supernatural folklore in a world that had no room for impossible things. But in the deep tunnels beneath Dia, the digging continues. The red-eyed figures work tirelessly, expanding their domain, connecting their underground city to networks that stretch across the continent. And sometimes, late at night when the airport is at its quietest, travelers waiting for connecting flights hear sounds that don't belong in the modern world. Chanting voices from beneath the floor, the scrape of tools on stone, the sound of something ancient and hungry building a foothold in America. Most of them dismiss these sounds as stress or imagination or the normal noise of a busy airport. But a few remember the stories they read online, the urban legends about secret tunnels and red-eyed figures. And they wonder if some horror stories might be more than just stories after all. Story 4. Thing in the highway rest stop. The growling started before Jake even opened the restroom door. Low and wet, like something trying to clear its throat with a mouth full of blood. It echoed off the concrete walls of the rest stop bathroom, bouncing around the empty stalls like a trapped animal. Jake Martinez had been driving 18-wheelers across Texas highways for 12 years. He had heard every sound a truck could make, every noise the road could throw at him. But this was different. This was wrong. The Interstate 35 rest area sat in the middle of nowhere, between Austin and San Antonio. Mile marker 174. The kind of place truckers stopped when their bladders could not wait for civilization. Concrete block building, fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry insects, vending machines that ate your quarters and gave you nothing back. It was 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. The parking lot held only Jake's rig and a beat-up sedan with Oklahoma plates. No other signs of life for 50 miles in any direction. Jake had pulled in because he needed to pee and stretch his legs. Simple as that. But now he stood outside the men's room door, listening to sounds that made his skin crawl. The growling came again, deeper this time, more aggressive, like whatever was making it had noticed his presence. Jake pushed open the door and stepped inside. The restroom was exactly what you would expect from a highway rest stop. 3 stalls with doors that barely closed. 2 urinals stained yellow with decades of use. A sink with a mirror so dirty you could barely see your reflection. The smell of industrial disinfectant mixed with human waste. But something was off. The fluorescent lights flickered in a pattern that hurt to look at. The air felt thick, like breathing through wet cotton, and the temperature was wrong. Too cold for Texas in October. Cold enough to see your breath. The growling stopped. Jake stood in the doorway, every instinct telling him to turn around and walk away. But his bladder was screaming, and the next rest stop was 30 miles down the road. He was a practical man, a working man. He did not have time for ghost stories or supernatural nonsense. Besides, it was probably just pipes. Old buildings made weird noises. Water pressure, air in the lines. Nothing to worry about. Jake walked to the nearest urinal and unzipped his jeans. That was when he heard the breathing. Not his own breathing. Something else. Something in the stalls behind him. Slow and deliberate, like someone trying very hard to stay quiet. Jake finished his business and zipped up. He turned toward the sinks, but his eyes went to the stalls. 3 doors, all slightly open. All dark inside. "Hello," he called out. No answer, just the sound of his own voice echoing off the concrete walls. Jake walked to the sink and turned on the faucet. The water came out brown at first, then cleared to a rusty orange. He cupped his hands and splashed some on his face, trying to shake off the creepy feeling that had settled over him like a blanket. In the dirty mirror, he could see the reflection of the stalls behind him. Still empty, still quiet, but something was moving in the shadows. Jake spun around. Nothing, just 3 empty stalls with doors that swayed slightly in the air current from the ventilation system. He was letting his imagination run wild. Too many horror movies, too many creepypasta stories his daughter had made him read. Too many late nights on empty highways where your mind started playing tricks. Jake dried his hands on his jeans and headed for the door. The growling started again. This time it was coming from the middle stall, low and throaty, like a dog warning you not to come closer. But there was something else mixed in, something that sounded almost human. Jake stopped walking. Every rational part of his brain told him to leave, get back in his truck, drive away, report a possible vagrant or wild animal to the state police and let them deal with it. But curiosity was a powerful thing, and Jake had never been good at leaving mysteries unsolved. He approached the middle stall slowly. The door was open about 6 inches, just enough to see inside if he got close enough. The growling got louder as he got closer. Jake reached out and pushed the door open. The stall was empty, just a toilet with a seat that had seen better days and graffiti scratched into the metal walls. But the sound was definitely coming from in there, and now that he was closer, he could smell something. Something rotten and sweet, like meat left out in the sun. Jake pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The small LED beam cut through the shadows, revealing nothing but concrete and porcelain. But the smell was getting stronger. Jake leaned into the stall, following the beam of light. That was when he noticed the scratches on the walls. Not graffiti, claw marks, deep gouges in the concrete, like something with very sharp fingernails had been trying to dig its way out. The breathing sound came from directly above him. Jake looked up and saw something that made his blood turn to ice water. There was something on the ceiling, something that looked almost human but was wrong in every way that mattered. It clung to the concrete like a spider, arms and legs bent at impossible angles. Its head hung down toward Jake, and in the light from his phone, he could see its face. Or what was left of it. The thing had been human once. Jake could tell by the basic shape. 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, a head. But everything else was wrong. The limbs were too long and too thin. The fingers ended in claws that had dug deep grooves in the ceiling. And the face was the worst part. It looked like someone had taken a human head and stretched it like taffy. The mouth was too wide, filled with teeth that were too sharp. The eyes were black holes that seemed to swallow the light from Jake's phone. And it was smiling. Jake tried to scream, but no sound came out. He tried to run, but his legs would not move. He could only stand there, frozen with terror, staring up at the thing that stared back at him. The creature opened its mouth and let out a sound that was part growl, part laugh, part something else entirely. Something that sounded like words in a language Jake did not recognize. Then it dropped from the ceiling. Jake found his voice and screamed. He also found his legs and ran. He crashed out of the stall, stumbled across the restroom, and hit the door at full speed. The metal handle slammed into his ribs, but he barely felt it. All he could think about was getting away from whatever that thing was. Jake burst out of the restroom and ran toward his truck. Behind him, he could hear the bathroom door slam open and footsteps on concrete. Fast footsteps, Too fast for something that big. He reached his truck and fumbled with the keys. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely get the key in the lock. The footsteps were getting closer. Jake finally got the door open and threw himself into the cab. He slammed the door and hit the lock button, then immediately started the engine. The big diesel rumbled to life, and Jake had never been so happy to hear that sound. He put the truck in gear and stomped on the gas pedal. The 18-wheeler lurched forward, tires squealing on the asphalt. Jake did not look in his mirrors. He did not want to see what might be following him. He drove for 10 miles before he felt safe enough to slow down. His heart was still pounding, and his hands were still shaking, but the immediate terror was starting to fade. Now he just felt confused and angry. What the hell had he seen back there? Jake pulled over at the next truck stop and parked under the bright lights. Other trucks were scattered around the lot, and he could see drivers moving around inside the building. Normal people doing normal things. It felt like stepping back into the real world. He sat in his cab for a few minutes, trying to make sense of what had happened. Maybe it had been a homeless person, someone strung out on drugs, hiding in the bathroom. That would explain the weird behavior and the smell. But it would not explain how the person had been clinging to the ceiling. Jake pulled out his phone and thought about calling the police. But what would he say? That he had seen a monster in a rest stop bathroom? They would think he was crazy, or drunk, or both. Instead, he opened his browser and searched for information about the rest area at mile marker 174. Maybe there had been other incidents. Maybe he was not the first person to see something strange there. What he found made his blood run cold all over again. The first result was a forum post from 6 months ago. A trucker named Rodriguez had stopped at the same rest area and reported seeing something inhuman in the bathroom. His post had been full of spelling errors in capital letters, the kind of thing that usually got dismissed as a hoax. But the details matched what Jake had experienced. The growling, the smell, the thing on the ceiling. The second result was a news article from 2 years ago. Trucker found dead at highway rest stop. The article was short and did not provide many details, but it mentioned that the driver had been found in the restroom with what police described as unusual injuries. The third result was another forum post, this one from last year. A different trucker, a different story, but the same location. Same sounds, same smell, same thing hanging from the ceiling like a spider. Jake kept reading. The post went back 5 years. All different people, all describing the same encounter, and they all mentioned something else. The thing only appeared between 3 and 4 a.m. Jake looked at his phone, his clock. 3:47 a.m. He was still in the danger zone. Jake started his truck and got back on the highway. He needed to put as much distance as possible between himself and that rest stop. Whatever was there, it was real. It was dangerous. And it was still hunting. But as he drove, Jake could not stop thinking about the other truckers who had posted their stories online. All of them had survived their encounters. All of them had managed to get away. Except for the one who had not. The dead trucker from 2 years ago. The one with the unusual injuries. Jake wondered what had been different about that night. Why had that driver not been able to escape when the others had? He got his answer an hour later when his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he did not recognize. Jake almost did not answer, but something made him pick up. Hello. The voice on the other end was his own. Jake Martinez, the voice said. Truck number 447. Currently driving south on Interstate 35. Jake nearly drove off the road. He pulled over to the shoulder and put the truck in park. Who is this? You know who this is, his own voice replied. You saw me tonight, in the bathroom, on the ceiling. Jake felt his throat go dry. This was not possible. This was not real. This was the kind of thing that happened in horror movies and creepypasta stories, not to real people driving real trucks on real highways. What do you want? Jake whispered. I want what you took from me, the voice said. I did not take anything. You saw me. You looked at me. You know what I am now. That makes you dangerous. Jake ended the call and threw his phone onto the passenger seat. But it rang again immediately. This time he did not answer. But he could hear it ringing. Over and over. The same unknown number. The same impossible caller. After the fifth call, Jake picked up the phone again. Leave me alone. He said, I cannot do that, his own voice replied. You have seen too much. You know too much. And now you are part of it. Part of what? The hunt. The line went dead. Jake sat in his truck on the side of the highway, surrounded by darkness and silence. Other vehicles passed by occasionally, their headlights cutting through the night like searchlights. Normal people going to normal places. People who had never seen things that should not exist. He thought about calling the police again. But what would he tell them? That something was impersonating his voice on the phone? That a monster from a rest stop bathroom was threatening him? They would think he was having a breakdown. Maybe he was. Jake started the truck and got back on the road. He had a delivery to make in Houston, a job to finish, bills to pay, a life to live. But the phone calls continued. Every hour, on the hour, his own voice would call him. Sometimes it would threaten him. Sometimes it would just breathe into the phone. Sometimes it would laugh. By dawn, Jake was exhausted and paranoid. He had not slept. He had barely eaten. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound made him jump. He made his delivery in Houston and picked up a new load heading back north. The dispatcher asked if he was feeling all right. Jake said he was fine, just tired from the drive. But he was not fine. He was being hunted by something that should not exist. Something that had gotten inside his head and was making his life hell. The phone calls continued for 3 days. Always his own voice. Always at random times. Always with threats or promises or just silence that somehow felt worse than words. On the 4th day, Jake decided to do something about it. He drove back to the rest stop at mile marker 174. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. Bright sunshine. Other travelers in the parking lot. Families with kids. Normal people living normal lives. Jake parked his truck and walked to the restroom building. In the daylight, it looked harmless. Just a concrete structure with metal doors and small windows. The kind of place you stopped when you needed to use the bathroom and did not care about ambiance. Jake pushed open the door to the this room. It looked different in the daylight. Dirty but normal. 3 stalls, 2 urinals, a sink with a cracked mirror. No shadows to hide monsters. No strange smells. No sounds except the buzz of fluorescent lights. Jake walked to the middle stall and looked up at the ceiling. The claw marks were still there. Deep gouges in the concrete that had not been there by accident. Proof that what he had seen was real. But there was something else. Something he had not noticed in the darkness and terror of that night. Words scratched into the concrete next to the claw marks. Hard to read, but definitely there. It follows. And below that, in different handwriting, no escape. And below that, join US. Jake felt his blood turn cold. Other people had been here. Other people had seen the thing. And they had left messages. He pulled out his phone and took pictures of the scratches in the words. Evidence. Proof that he was not going crazy. That was when he noticed the new message. Scratched into the concrete in letters that looked fresh. Jake Martinez, truck 447. His name, his truck number, written in claw marks on the ceiling of a rest stop bathroom. Jake ran. He did not stop running until he was back at his truck. He got in and locked the doors and started the engine. Then he drove away as fast as the speed limit would allow. But he knew it was too late. Whatever that thing was, it had marked him. It knew who he was. It knew where to find him. The phone calls stopped that day. But Jake knew that did not mean he was safe. It meant something worse was coming. He started researching online. Urban legends about rest stops. American horror stories about truck drivers who disappeared. Creepypasta tales about things that lived in the spaces between civilization. What he found was not comforting. The rest stop at mile marker 174 had a history. Truckers had been reporting strange encounters there for over 20 years. Most were dismissed as hallucinations brought on by fatigue and isolation. But the reports were consistent. Something lived in that bathroom. Something that hunted during the early morning hours. And according to the stories, once it marked you, you had 2 choices. You could run for the rest of your life, always looking over your shoulder, always waiting for it to catch up. Or you could go back and join it. Jake chose to run. He changed his route, avoided Interstate 35 entirely. Took longer trips that kept him away from that part of Texas. It cost him money and time, but it seemed to work. For 2 months, he did not see the thing. Did not get any strange phone calls. Did not find his name scratched into bathroom walls. He started to think he was safe. Then his daughter called. Emma was 19 and studying at the University of Texas. She had always been smart and independent, but lately she had been having nightmares. Seeing things in the shadows. Hearing sounds that should not be there. "Dad," she said during their weekly phone call, "I think something is following me." Jake felt his heart stop. "What do you mean? I keep seeing this thing. In the mirrors at school. In the windows of my dorm room. It looks almost human, but wrong. And it knows my name." Jake gripped the phone so hard his knuckles turned white. "Emma, listen to me very carefully. I need you to pack a bag and come home. Right now. Do not go anywhere alone. Do not use any rest stops on the highway. And whatever you do, do not stop at mile marker 174 on Interstate 35. Dad, you are scaring me." "Good. You should be scared. This thing, whatever it is not just after me anymore. It is after my family. Emma came home that weekend. She looked tired and scared, like someone who had not been sleeping well. She told Jake about the dreams she had been having. Dreams about a thing with too many teeth and fingers that ended in claws. Dreams about rest stop bathrooms and concrete ceilings. Dreams that matched exactly what Jake had seen. That night, Jake made a decision. He could not run forever. He could not let this thing terrorize his daughter. He had to end it. He drove back to mile marker 174. It was 3 a.m. when he arrived. The parking lot was empty except for his truck. The rest stop building sat in the darkness like a tomb, lit only by a few security lights that cast long shadows across the concrete. Jake walked to the men's room and pushed open the door. The thing was waiting for him. It hung from the ceiling in the middle stall, exactly where he had first seen it. But now it was different, bigger, more defined, like it had been feeding and growing stronger. And it was not alone. Other shapes clung to the walls and ceiling. Human once, but changed, twisted, made into something else. Jake recognized some of the faces from the forum posts he had read. Truckers who had encountered the thing and never made it home. Jake Martinez. The thing said in a voice like grinding glass. You came back. Let my daughter go. Jake said. This is between you and me. The thing laughed. The sound echoed off the concrete walls like breaking bottles. Your daughter is already ours. She has seen us. She knows what we are. Soon she will join us, just like you will. What are you? We are what remains, the thing said. The spaces between civilization, the darkness that lives in forgotten places. We are what happens when people see too much and know too much and cannot forget. Jake looked around the bathroom at the other shapes on the walls. All of them had been human once. All of them had made the same mistake he had made. They had looked when they should have looked away. There is no escape, the thing continued. You can run, but we will always find you. You can hide, but we will always know where you are. You can fight, but we are stronger now. Then what do you want? Join us willingly, the thing said. Become one of us, hunt with us, feed with us, and we will leave your daughter alone. Jake thought about Emma, about her dreams and her fears and the thing that was stalking her because of his mistake. If I say yes, you will let her go? We will forget she exists. Jake knew he had no choice. This was not about him anymore. This was about protecting his daughter. This was about being a father. Okay, he said, I will join you. The thing smiled with too many teeth. Then come to us. Jake walked into the stall. The other creatures watched from their positions on the walls and ceiling. Waiting, hungry, the original thing dropped from the ceiling and landed in front of Jake. Up close, it was even more horrible. He could see the human features buried under the twisted flesh. Could smell the decay and rawness that surrounded it like a cloud. Hold still, the thing said. This will only hurt for a moment. It reached out with claws that had once been fingernails and touched Jake, his forehead. Pain exploded through his skull. Not just physical pain, but something deeper. Something that tore at his mind and his soul and everything that made him human. Jake screamed. He screamed until his throat was raw and his voice was gone. He screamed until the pain became everything and nothing else existed. When it was over, Jake was different. He could feel the changes starting immediately. His fingers were getting longer. His teeth were getting sharper. His thoughts were becoming alien and hungry. But part of him was still human. Part of him still remembered Emma and the promise he had made. You said you would leave my daughter alone, Jake said. His voice sounded different now. Rougher, like something was wrong with his throat. We lied, the thing said. Jake felt rage unlike anything he had ever experienced. But it was not human rage anymore. It was something darker and more primal. Something that belonged to creatures that hunted in the spaces between worlds. You promised, Jake growled. We are hunters, the thing replied. We do not keep promises to prey. That was when Jake realized the final truth about his horror story. He had not joined them to save his daughter. He had joined them to hunt her. The thing had not just changed his body. It had changed his mind, his desires, his nature. He could feel the hunger growing inside him. And he knew that Emma would be the first thing he would want to eat. But there was still a small part of his human mind left. A tiny fragment of the man he had been. And that fragment was screaming. Jake used every ounce of willpower he had left to fight the hunger. To resist the change. To hold on to what remained of his humanity. It was not enough. The next morning, a state trooper found Jake's truck at the rest stop. The keys were still in the ignition. His wallet was on the passenger seat. But Jake Martinez was nowhere to be found. The official report listed him as a missing person. Probably a victim of foul play. Though no evidence was found. His truck was impounded. His family was notified. Emma came to collect his personal belongings. She drove down Interstate 35, past mile marker 174, to the impound lot in San Antonio. She did not stop at the rest area. She did not need to use the bathroom. She drove straight past without even looking at the building. But something in the bathroom was looking at her. Something that had once been her father was hanging from the ceiling of the middle stall, watching the highway through the small window. Watching for familiar vehicles. Watching for prey. The hunger was constant now. The human part of Jake Martinez was buried so deep it might as well not exist. What remained was something else entirely. Something that belonged to the supernatural darkness that lived in forgotten places. But sometimes, late at night when the rest stop was empty and the only sound was the buzz of fluorescent lights, the thing that had been Jake would remember a phone number. And they would call, Emma would answer, and she would hear breathing on the other end of the line. Slow and deliberate breathing that sounded almost familiar. She would hang up, and the phone would ring again. This had been going on for 6 months now. Always the same number, always the same breathing, always at 3 a.m., the witching hour when supernatural things were strongest. Emma had changed her number twice. It did not help. The calls always found her. Last week, she had started having dreams again. Dreams about rest stop bathrooms and things that clung to ceilings. Dreams about her father calling her name in a voice that was almost but not quite right. Emma knew she should stay away from Interstate 35, should avoid rest stops altogether, should probably leave Texas entirely and start over somewhere else. But she also knew it would not matter. The thing had marked her, had been hunting her since the night her father disappeared. And sooner or later, she would make a mistake. She would need to use a bathroom at the wrong time in the wrong place. She would stop at mile marker 174. And when she did, something that had once loved her would be waiting. The American horror story was not over. It was just beginning its next chapter. Because in the spaces between civilization, in the forgotten places where normal people only stopped when they had no choice, things were always hungry. Things were always hunting, and they never forgot a face. Story 5. Highway hitchhiker with empty eyes. The radio died the moment Sarah pulled over. Static filled the car like white noise from hell. Outside, a man in black stood by the roadside. Thumb out. Dark sunglasses reflecting nothing but empty highway. Sarah Chen should have kept driving. Should have trusted her gut when every instinct screamed danger, but the Trans-Canada Highway stretched endlessly through New Brunswick wilderness. Miles of forest and fog. Nobody deserved to walk alone out here. She rolled down the passenger window. The man approached without hurrying. His movements too smooth, too deliberate. Need a lift? Sarah called. The stranger nodded once, opened the door, slid into the seat beside her. That's when she noticed his sunglasses. The lenses were black, completely black, like looking into a void. The car's interior temperature dropped 10 degrees. Where are you headed? Sarah asked. Her breath formed clouds in the suddenly frigid air. The man turned toward her. Behind those dark lenses, there was nothing. Not darkness, not shadow, nothing at all. A hollow space where I should be. Wherever you be going, he said. His voice sounded like gravel on broken glass. Sarah, his hands trembled on the steering wheel. This felt like something from American horror stories. Urban legends shared around campfires. The kind of creepypasta that made people avoid empty highways. But this was real. She pulled back onto the road. The engine ran rough now. Sputtering like it was dying, her dashboard lights flickered. The fuel gauge needles swung wildly between empty and full. Car trouble? The passenger asked. Just started. Sarah kept her eyes on the road. Didn't want to look at those empty sockets again. Happens a lot out here. Something about this stretch of highway. Cars just die. Miles passed in silence. The man sat perfectly still. Didn't to fidget. Didn't to breathe that Sarah could tell. Just stared ahead through those black lenses at nothing. The radio crackled back to life. A trucker, his voice cut through the static. This is Big Dog on Channel 19. Got a safety warning for drivers on the Trans-Canada through New Brunswick. Don, to pick up the hitchhiker in black. Repeat, do not pick up the man in black sunglasses. Sarah, this blood turned to ice water. Multiple reports, the trucker continued. Drivers who gave him rides say their cars broke down after. Found strange burns on their seats, like something was drawing heat from the world. The radio cut to static again. Then silence. Sarah glanced at her passenger. He hadn't reacted to the warning at all. Funny, he said. People talk too much. The car shuddered. Steam poured from under the hood. Sarah pulled onto the shoulder as the engine died completely. Looks like you having that car trouble now, the man said. Sarah tried the ignition. Nothing. The battery was completely dead. Even her phone showed no signal, like they'd driven into a dead zone. I should take a look under the hood, she said. No need. The passenger opened his door. This is where I get out. He stepped onto the pavement, straightened his black coat. For a moment, his sunglasses reflected the dying daylight. Sarah saw herself in the lenses, but behind them, that terrible emptiness remained. Thank you for the ride, he said. The man walked into the forest, disappeared between the trees like smoke. Sarah sat alone in her dead car, heart hammering, hands shaking. She tried the radio again, desperate for any sound, any connection to the normal world. Static filled the speakers, then a whisper, barely audible, like wind through broken glass. Thank you for the ride to hell. The radio went silent. Sarah grabbed her purse and got out of the car. She walked to the nearest town. Find help. Put this nightmare behind her. But something was wrong with her seat. The passenger side looked normal. Worn fabric. A few coffee stains. But where the man in black had sat, the upholstery was burned. Charred outlines marked where his body had been, like something had drawn all the heat from the world, all the life. Sarah ran. She jogged down the highway, legs pumping, lungs burning. The forest pressed close on both sides. Dark trees stretched like grasping fingers. After an hour, she saw lights. A truck stop glowed in the distance. Salvation. Sarah burst through the door. Truckers looked up from their coffee. A waitress behind the counter raised an eyebrow. You okay, honey? Look like you've seen a ghost. Sarah collapsed into a booth. My car broke down. I need to call a tow truck. Where at? About 20 miles back, near mile marker 47. The truckers exchanged glances. One of them, a big man with arms covered in tattoos, shook his head. That is a bad stretch of road, lady. People go missing there. Missing. Cars found abandoned. Drivers just gone. Been happening for years. The trucker sipped his coffee. Started back in the 80s. Some kind of supernatural weirdness. Sarah felt cold creep up her spine. What kind of weirdness? Hitchhiker in black. Wears sunglasses even at night. People pick him up. Their cars die. Sometimes the drivers are never seen again. The waitress nodded. My cousin gave him a ride 5 years ago. Found her car by the roadside. Engine completely fried. She was wandering in the woods. Didn't remember anything after he got in. What did she remember about him? Said his eyes were wrong, like looking into empty space. Made her skin crawl. Sarah's heart sank. She wasn't the first victim. This thing had been hunting drivers for decades. There's more, the trucker continued. People who survive say weird stuff happens after. Electronics die around them. Radios pick up voices from nowhere, like something followed them home. As if summoned by his words, Sarah's phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Thank you for the ride. Sarah dropped the phone like it was on fire. You picked him up, didn't you? The waitress asked. Sarah nodded, too scared to speak. Honey, you need to get far away from here. Tonight, Don, to go home. Don, to go anywhere familiar. That thing marks people. What do you mean? It feeds on something. Life force, maybe? Heat, whatever makes people human. The waitress leaned closer. The ones who survive are never the same. Cold all the time. To get warm. Like something sucked the fire right out of them. Sarah was already shivering. The truck stopped. Whose heater was running full blast, but she felt frozen to her bones. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. We're getting colder. Sarah grabbed the trucker's arm. Help me, please. Don, do you know what to do? Best thing is to keep moving. Don, to stay in one place too long. Some say it can detract you if you keep crossing running water. That is just superstition. Maybe, but people who follow that rule tend to survive longer. Sarah bought a cup of coffee and tried to think. The logical thing was to report this to police. File a missing car report. Get insurance involved. But what would she tell them? A supernatural hitchhiker with empty eyes had stolen her life force? They'd think she was crazy. Her phone rang. The display showed her own number. She was calling herself. Sarah answered with trembling fingers. Hello. Her own voice came through the speaker. But wrong. Hollow, like an echo from the bottom of a well. You shouldn't have stopped, the voice said. Now you re-part of the road. The line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone. That was impossible. She was right here. How could she be calling herself? Unless the thing could copy more than just appearance. The trucker noticed her expression. What happened? It called me, using my own voice. Jesus, it's getting stronger. He stood up. Come on. I am driving to Montreal tonight. You can ride along. Keep moving, like I said. Sarah nodded gratefully. Anything was better than staying here. They walked out to his 18-wheeler. A massive Kenworth with chrome exhaust stacks. The trucker climbed into the driver's seat. Sarah got in the passenger side. The radio crackled to life as they pulled onto the highway. "This is Big Dog on Channel 19, a familiar voice said. "Be advised, the hitchhiker in black is active tonight. 3 more cars found abandoned. Drivers missing." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She recognized that voice. Her own. "It's me," she whispered. "That is my voice on the radio." The trucker looked at her with growing alarm. "Lady, that ain't possible." But Sarah heard herself continue broadcasting, warning other drivers, using her voice, her speech patterns, her mannerisms. The thing was wearing her identity like a mask. "Pull over," Sarah said. "I need to get out." "No way. You safer with me. You don't. Do you understand? It's using me. My voice, my identity. Other people are going to get hurt." The trucker kept driving, but Sarah could see doubt in his eyes. Was she real, or was she the thing wearing Sarah's face? How could anyone tell the difference? Sarah looked at her reflection in the passenger window. Normal face, normal eyes, but something felt wrong, like she was looking at a stranger. Her phone buzzed with a new message. From her own number again. "Stop pretending to be me." Sarah's hands shook. Was she losing her mind? Having some kind of breakdown? Or was the thing playing games with her sanity? The radio crackled again, this time a different voice. The trucker from the truck stop. "This is Big Dog. Disregard my last transmission. I'm getting reports that something is copying people's voices." Dawn, to trust the radio tonight. But Sarah knew that wasn't the real trucker. The real one was sitting next to her. Wasn't he? She looked at the driver. Same face, same tattoos, same concerned expression. But something was off about his eyes. They seemed flat, lifeless. "You, not him," Sarah whispered. The trucker smiled. "Took you long enough to notice." His face began to change, melting like wax, reforming into something else. The hitchhiker in black sunglasses. Sarah scrambled for the door handle. The truck was doing 60 on a dark highway. Jumping would probably kill her, but staying would definitely kill her. "Where do you think you're going?" the thing asked. Its voice was a mix of the trucker and her own. Layered, unnatural. "What are you? What happens when people die on the road? All that fear, all that loneliness, it has to go somewhere." The creature, this form kept shifting. Sometimes the trucker, sometimes Sarah herself, sometimes the man in black. "The highway collects souls," it continued. "Especially this stretch. So many accidents, so much death. And what grew from all that pain?" Sarah understood now. This wasn't just some supernatural hitchhiker. It was the road itself, fed by decades of crashes and disappearances. "Every time someone dies here, I get stronger, smarter, better at wearing human faces." The truck began to slow down. Sarah saw her abandoned car up ahead, right where she left it. "This is where you got in," the thing said. "This is where you get out." The truck stopped. Sarah's car looked exactly the same, except now there were 2 figures standing beside it. Sarah herself, and the trucker from the truck stop, both waving at her, both smiling. "Come on," they called in unison. "We've been waiting for you." Sarah realized the horrible truth. The thing hadn't just copied her voice. It had absorbed her. The real Sarah had died the moment she picked up that hitchhiker. Everything since then had been the creature learning to be her. Dead," she whispered. "Not dead. Processed. Improved. You part of the road now." The thing wearing the trucker's face opened the passenger door. Time to go back to work. Sarah climbed out of the truck. She had no choice. Her body moved without her permission. The other versions of herself and the trucker greeted her warmly. Like old friends. "How many drivers tonight?" one asked. 3 so far. Should be more coming through before dawn." Sarah tried to scream, tried to run, but her body wouldn't obey. She was a passenger now in her own flesh. The thing had complete control. They positioned themselves along the highway. Sarah by mile marker 47. The trucker near the truck stop. Perfect spacing to catch everyone. Hours passed. Cars drove by. Some stopped for the hitchhiker in black. Others picked up Sarah when she pretended to have car trouble. Each time, the same pattern. The vehicle would break down. The driver would hear whispers on the radio. Then they joined the collection. By morning, 6 new faces walked the Trans-Canada Highway. All of them looking for rides. All of them hungry for company. Sarah watched it happen with growing horror. She was helping this thing hunt innocent people, but she couldn't stop herself. The creature had turned her into bait. Weeks passed. The collection grew. Dozens of faces now worked the highway. Truckers, families, solo travelers, all absorbed, all controlled. But something was changing. Sarah began to remember things that weren't hers. Memories from other victims. Their lives, their loves, their fears. The hitchhiker wasn't just copying people. It was preserving them, every personality, every soul, all trapped inside its expanding consciousness. And they were starting to fight back. Late one night, Sarah felt something crack in her mental prison. A moment of clarity, of control. She was standing by her abandoned car, waiting for the next victim. A young couple in a Honda had just pulled over. Need help? The driver called. Sarah opened her mouth to lie, to draw them into the trap. But different words came out. Run, she whispered. Don, stop. Keep driving. The creature tried to reassert control, but other voices joined Sarah's rebellion. Dozens of trapped souls pushing back against their captor. Go, they screamed through Sarah's mouth. Get out of here. The couple saw something in Sarah's eyes. Terror, desperation, the look of someone fighting for their sanity. They drove away fast. The hitchhiker entity roared with rage. Sarah felt its attention focus on her like a burning laser. You will obey, it hissed through her lips. No, Sarah and all the other trapped souls spoke as one. We won. The battle for control raged through the night. Dozens of personalities fighting against their supernatural captor, each one adding strength to the rebellion. By dawn, something had changed on the Trans-Canada Highway. The abandoned cars remained, the burn marks on seats, the strange cold spots. But the figures walking the roadside were different now. They still flagged down drivers, still asked for rides, but their warnings came with their requests. Don, pick me up, they say. Keep driving. Tell others to stay away. The highway entity had lost control of its collection. The souls it had absorbed were using their borrowed bodies to protect new victims. A supernatural horror had become a cautionary tale. But the road still hungered. Late at night, when fog rolled in from the forests, drivers reported seeing a new figure. Tall, dressed in black, sunglasses reflecting nothing, the original hitchhiker, hunting for fresh souls to replace the ones that had rebelled. And sometimes, when the radio crackled with static, voices whispered warnings. This is Sarah Chen. Don, stop for the man in black. He is not human. Keep driving. Tell everyone. Make them understand. The message repeated endlessly. A ghost in the machine. A soul broadcasting from beyond. But people still stopped, still picked up strangers on dark highways. Because helping others is what makes us human. Even when humanity itself has become the trap. Sarah's voice continues to warn drivers on Channel 19. Her spirit trapped between worlds. Neither alive nor dead. Just another casualty of the road. And somewhere in the New Brunswick wilderness, footsteps echo on empty asphalt. The hitchhiker walks his beat, patient, hungry, waiting for the next console to pull over. The next victim to whisper through their radio. Thank you for the ride to hell. But now the highway fights back. Trapped souls warning new drivers. A supernatural neighborhood watch. The battle between predator and prey plays out nightly on the Trans-Canada. American horror made real on Canadian asphalt. And the road keeps score. Miles of broken cars, decades of disappearances, countless souls caught between dimensions. All because someone stopped to help. The most human thing you can do. And the most dangerous. Sarah's warnings echo through the static. But they were getting weaker. Fainter, like batteries running down. How long before the voices fade completely? How long before the hitchhiker reclaims his highway? The fog rolls in from the forest. Headlights cut through the darkness. And somewhere ahead, a figure raises his thumb. Dark sunglasses reflecting nothing but empty road. Thank you for the ride.